Hello, welcome to Coding with Tom. Today we're going to be creating widgets. One of them will show the castle with the highest attack points, and the other one will show the perk that is closest to its cooldown time. This widget will have a timer, and when it's ready, it will change to a ready-to-use text. We will begin by adding a widget target to our app. So for that, we select iOS, and we will add a widget extension. Just like it did for watchOS, the widget extension creates another folder and another target. So for this, we need to add the common model. In this case, for our first widget, it's going to be the castle. And let's see what was created. So if we go to the castle widgets, we'll see that we just have one class created for us. This one has a provider, the timeline entry, and the widget inside. We're going to separate this into different files. Also, since we are presenting more than one widget, we need to create a widget bundle. For our widget bundle, we declare this as the main. We need to change the target here. And then our widget bundle is not a view, it's a widget bundle. And the body we declare with the annotation widget bundle builder. Then here we just declare every widget that we're going to be presenting. Now let's do some cleanup here since the code that was generated for us is a little bit messy. Everything is in the same file. So now let's move the castle widget out of this and let's leave the provider here for now. Since we are dealing with widgets, we need to import WidgetKit. We won't have this simple entry that was given to us. We will have a castle entry. It will include the date because it's required by protocol, and a castle, which has the information that we will be displaying in the widget. Our view will need a castle entry, and then we need to update our preview provider with the relevant information. To temporarily get rid of the build errors, we'll import intents here. And since we deleted the simple entry, we need to modify our provider to provide a castle entry instead. For now, we're just going to use a placeholder castle, just so we can build. We'll do the same for get snapshot and get timeline. Okay, now that we can build, let's start extracting data and see one of the issues that we're going to have. So let's add kingdom service and the associated models that we need for this. And in our castles provider, let's now use this kingdom service. And for now, let's just print out the gold that the kingdom has. And let's see what happens. This is the current state of our app. So we have 260 in gold. Now let's try running the widgets extension. Notice what happens here. It says 1000 gold. How is this possible if we just saw that in the app we have 260? The answer for this is that in our Kingdom service, we're retrieving the information from a file, right? We're retrieving it from a castles file. The thing is, because the widgets extension runs on a different target, it doesn't have access to the same information. To remedy this, we can use app group. App groups are a way of different apps to share the same shared container. In order to create an app group, you do need to have a development team linked to this. I'm going to add here an app group and I will create an identifier. Keep in mind, if you don't have Xcode automatically manage sign-in, you will have to go into your developer account and add this same app group to your ID. We will do exactly the same for the widgets extension. So make sure that you copy the exact same app group identifier. Notice that we already have here the container. That's because Xcode already manages this. We just hit refresh and select that container. Now with our app group, let's go to the Kingdom service and use that shared container. We will still be using the file manager, but instead of asking for the URLs, we ask for a container URL for a security application group identifier. That's where our app group identifier goes. In case we cannot find this URL, we'll just send the file URL from the app. And here we do the same. We append the castle's path to the directory. And in our save and retrieve data methods, we will just use this new URL. When we run the app again, it's gonna start from scratch since we are grabbing new data. Let's perform simple actions to change the amount of gold. And then we will check what happens when we run the widget extension. Now when we run, notice how the gold is what we have in our app. So now we are sharing data. Now what's next is let's go to our castle widget, build it, and then we will populate it with data obtained from use cases. First thing, we're going to be using a static configuration for our widget configuration. We don't need an intent configuration, which is, well, user intent. We know what we're going to be displaying. We don't need the user configuring anything. So the first step is changing this, and this will break our current implementation because castle timeline provider to the right protocol. We need to switch it to timeline provider and change the get snapshot and timeline methods. Now we are ready to get back to our widget. Let's start by adding the images that were added to the app. We also need to add them to the widget extension. Keep in mind, again, they are not optimized for small views like widgets, so we're just going to be resizing images. So what we're going to do is we're going to display the image of the castle, and we will also show the health. We will represent this with a heart through an SF symbol, and we will show the attack power. And there we go. It seems that like we are done, but let's add the other widget families here and see how the preview looks. Now you can see how we have a lot of wasted space. We should be changing how the widget looks for each family. To do that, we need to use an environment variable, so in the view, we know where we are being presented in one type of family. Let's have our small view in a different variable, and in our body, we'll use a switch with the widget family. So for our system small, we pass in our small view, and for the other ones for now, let's just send unsupported. And for our medium view, we have a little bit more space, so we'll do something similar to our small view, but we'll have more space to show the castle, the image of the castle, and I think we can also show the defense power. For the large view, we're not going to complicate ourselves. We'll just add the same of the medium view, but we will also show the name of the castle. Let's make the font a little bit bigger. And there we have it, our castle widget for the three sizes. Okay, our use case here is going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to retrieve the castles from the Kingdom service, and then we'll just get the minimum since we're going to be sorting by the highest. So the minimum will fetch us the first one in the list that meet this criteria. Now let's go back to our provider, and instead of using the Kingdom service, we will use our new use case. Let's start with the snapshot. So for a snapshot, you can be asked for a preview or the real entry. In case of a preview, we won't call the use case, we will just be passing a hard-coded value. In case it is not a preview, then we will be using our use case. For the getTimeline method, we're going to return the same. The castle returned by our use case. We're just going to return one entry. And in the policy update, we will use never because the app is going to be the one telling the widgets when to update. Let's try running. We'll see when we are loading a castle, although I believe it's the one with the lowest attack. Let's go to our use case. Oh, the inequality is the wrong way. Greater than, good. Now let's change something in the app. Let's increase the attack in our first castle. And notice that the widget is not updating. Now that's because the app needs to be the one telling the widgets to update because of our update policy. We're going to update the widgets in our kingdom service, and that's when the data changes. So every time the kingdom changes, we will use the widget center. Now we need to change how we implement the kingdom service in the widget extension. So for that, we're going to create our own kingdom service that will fetch the data each time we ask. So instead of storing in a variable the data that we read from our shared container, what we will do is we will just fetch the kingdom data from the file each time. And because our widget implementation is much more simpler, our kingdom service on this side will only be fetching the castles. We won't need any of the other methods. Let's now run. Because we kept the same method, we don't need to update the use case. Let's increase the attack. And see how our widgets were updated. Let's do it one more time with the correct orientation. 182. Okay. Now it's time for our perk widget. Let's start by creating the perk timeline provider. Let's leave it empty for now, since the entries and the data we need to create them on the perk. So let's just create this. We know we will have errors. And let's start with the perk widget. So our perk widget will have another timeline entry. This one will have, again, the date, and we'll have a perk. With this info, we can now have the perk timeline provider. So we will have our get snapshot and get timeline and placeholder. And the timeline entry that our provider is going to be using is going to be the perk entry. For now, we'll just use a sample perk for every one of the methods in our provider, and we'll come back to this after we have our widget done. Okay, now that we have that in order, let's go to our widget. First, we need to declare a kind. Now in our widget configuration, again, we're going to be using a static configuration. In the closure of the static configuration, we need to return a view that uses the entry. So for that, let's create the perk view. This one just takes a perk entry, and for now, let's just show the text. We create the perk view in our closure. We're just going to support small family for this widget. For that, we use the supported families modifier. The first part, our widget is really simple. We just show an image and the name of the perk. Now below this, here comes the interesting part. We're going to show the time remaining. So if we have time remaining in the cooldown, we'll be showing it as a timer. If the time is less than 0, we display the text ready to use. To display the time, we will use a date formatter. It's actually a date component formatter. We create a static bar so we don't have to create a formatter each time we want to calculate the value of the timer. And then we use this formatter to display the remaining time. Now let's mess around with the preview. So if we change the time interval, it seems to be working. Our time is getting formatted. Now we need to add it to our bundle so we can see it when we run. Let's try adding another widget. Notice that we now have 4. And here's our perk widget. Notice that it is only appearing for small family. Just like we did for the Kingdom service, we need to create a lighter version of the perk service that retrieves the data from the shared container each time. This is just for the widget. We have to also change our current perk service in the app to use the shared file URL. For our use case, we'll do something similar. We'll retrieve the perks from the service and get the one with the minimum cooldown time. Let's now use this use case in the timeline provider, the perk timeline provider. We'll use it for the snapshot and for the get timeline. To see more easily the timer, we'll increase the cooldown time of both perks. Let's try running. Let's use a perk. Use the Smith. So notice it's saying ready to use. Good. Now, notice the harvest. The timer is stuck in 12 seconds. Once it updates again, nothing is happening. Let's update the perk. And it is getting updated. Now the problem is that the timer is not modifying constantly. For that, we need to take a different approach. For this, we will have to use, instead of a time formatter, we will use the view text. Text comes with a, let's call it a style, where you can display a date and the time interval is displayed as a timer. So for that, let's change our time remaining to a text view. Ready to use is just a normal text presenting a string, but when we have cooldown time remaining, what we'll do is we'll return a text that displays a date, which is the cooldown date, and the style will be timer. Pretty convenient. Now let's try running. So our harvest is ready to use. Let's use both of our perks. And let's go back to the widget. And there we can see now that the harvest has a timer running. It has a little bit of a padding issue, which we can fix. But let's also see something else. What happens when it reaches 0? Oh, our ready to use text is not being presented. Now we need to fix two issues. Let's start with the isFix, the padding that was being shown in the timer. So we're gonna embed this in an H tag, put it between two spacers. This will not be enough because when you display the timer, it is actually occupying the entire width. So for that, let's add a fixed frame for the timer view. The ready to use text, we'll leave it as it is. Since now we're returning two different views in our variable, we need to add the add view builder annotation. And there we go. Now our preview looks well for the two text. Now let's go to our perk timeline provider to fix the issue where the timer doesn't get updated to the ready to use text. For this, in the get timeline method, what we need to do is pass two timeline entries. One for the timer that is being displayed, and the other one when the text is updated to ready to use. So in case we cannot fetch the most recent perk, again, we will display just a sample perk. And when we do get a perk from our use case, we will provide two entries. One for the current date, where the perk does have a cooldown time, and then another one for when the perk finishes the cooldown time, and we'll send again the same perk. The difference is now in our widget, we need to use this new date to display the timer. In order to do so, we will need a new function in perk that calculates the remaining cooldown time not with regards to the current date, but to a date that we're passing as a parameter. And in our widget, instead of using the current date, we use the date that we get from our timeline entry. Let's try again. So here we have our timer. Let's fast forward a little bit. And now, when we reach 0, our timer changes to the text. And that was all for today. In this lesson, not only did we learn how to implement widgets in SwiftUI, we also learned how to share information between targets using app groups, and we also learned how to leverage text and the style that allows us to display a timer that updates in real time. Hope you liked it. Bye.